Bore da, croeso pawb. Good morning, welcome everyone. Mae'n braf iawn weld cymaint o pobl yn ymuno. Mae yna 38 ar hyn o bryd, so mae hwnna'n nifer ffantastig. Tom Coston ydw i o'r tîm tirwedd a hamdden yn Llywodraeth Cymru a un o partneriaid y prosiect hon. Dwi'n just mynd I roi ychydig o gefn i'r prosiect. Good morning. It's great to see so many people. It's up to 43 now, which is a brilliant number. My name's Tom Cosson and I'm from the Landscape and Recreation team in Welsh Government, and we're one of the project partners. So just going to give you a brief overview of the Ein Llwybrau Byw, Our Living Trails project before handing over to Juliet in Natural Resources Wales. So rydym yn falch iawn o'r llwybr arfordir yma yng Nghymru. The Wales Coast Path is something we're all rightly proud of, and I know ministers and Senedd members greatly value it too. Next year, we look forward to marking 10 years since its opening in 2012, which is hard to believe. In that time, it's become one of our key tourism products, as well as an amazing resource for the people of Wales. Last year, in response to a proposal from Gwyneth, we started discussing how we can make more use of this 870-mile corridor, not just for its access benefits, but also to increase condition and resilience on some of Wales's most valuable habitats. We've worked with NRW to fund this pilot project, and we're very grateful for their work in leading it. I'd just like to introduce Juliet now to say more about the project before the main presentation from Fran. Bydd y cyflwyniad yn y Saesneg, a mae croeso pawb I holi cwestiynau yn y ddwy iaith yn y chat bar. The main presentation will be in English, but you're welcome to ask questions in both languages in the chat bar. Diolch yn fawr.
Juliet, are you there?
Yep, hello there. Diolch Tom. Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. I'm the current team leader for the Outdoor Access and Recreation team in NRW, which is leading this work. Many of you will know Quentin Grimley in our team, who's the project manager for this exciting one-year pilot project, which we've developed with Welsh Government funding and in partnership with Gwyneth County Council. As Tom said, recent legislation is focusing NRW on achieving. Can you not hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you. You can carry on.
I think there's a funny delay.
Okay, well, just a few more lines.
Juliet. Yeah, there's no problem.
Okay, so as Tom said, recent legislation is focusing NRW on achieving multiple benefits from the work that we deliver. This pilot project will give us valuable learning for the future around. Yeah, I am talking. It is not coming. There must be a delay. I'll carry on talking. Okay, I'll carry on and hopefully it'll catch up, something slightly odd. Okay, as Tom said, recent legislation is focusing NRW on achieving multiple benefits from the work we deliver. This pilot project will give us valuable learning for the future around how we can work with partners along all of Wales' access corridors. We're starting with a section of the Wales Coast Path, but going forward, we want all of our access corridors to benefit, not just the path users, but the adjacent habitats, connecting people with the nature and farming around them. To deliver multiple benefits, we need partners who bring multiple skills, knowledge and experience to the project. So we're really pleased to have so many of you on the call today. This project is bringing together teams from across NRW, our colleagues in coastal, marine, biodiversity, geodiversity and in operations. And we're also pleased to be working with contractors Binnies, who are providing the additional resources necessary to make this pilot project a success. So I'd like to hand over to Fran Moore from Binnies, who's going to take you through the launch webinar. Diolch. Thank you.
Diolch, Juliet. Bore da pawb. Hello, everyone. My name is Francesca Moore. I'm technical lead for this project here at Binnies. If you're unfamiliar with Binnies, we're a consultancy providing mainly biodiversity, flood risk management and water services across the UK. Mostly for NRW, the Environment Agency in England, and also for numerous water companies as well. Before we start, just want to cover some housekeeping. For information, all attendees are muted as we have at the moment 58 people on the call today. So as such, please write any questions in Welsh or English throughout the presentation in the QA function in Teams. So you can see on the screen there, I've circled the pink button, so you'll find that located in the top right of your Teams screen. My colleagues will be collating all the questions and will direct them to the panel at the end of the presentation as well. We will publish each question as they come in so that you can all see the different questions that you're all asking to. And if your question is in Welsh, we will endeavour to reply in Welsh as well. So joining me on the call today, we have Tom Cosson, who you've already heard from Welsh Government. We have Quentin Grimley, who's Specialist Advisor, Outdoor Access and Recreation and at NLW, and he's also the Project Manager for this project too. We have Juliet Michael, who you just heard from, who's also in the Outdoor Access and Recreation team at NRW. And we also have Rhys Roberts as well, who is the Wales Coast Path Officer for Gwyneth County Council. For both English and Welsh speakers, if you'd like to, you can also add subtitles to the presentation too. And you can do that by clicking the 3 dots, which is next to the Q&A button in the top right of your screen, and selecting captions, and then selecting the language. However, I've not used it, so please don't come back to me if it's not very good or inaccurate, but thought it might be useful for some people on the call. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded and will be available after the meeting if you wish to pass it on to others who want to hear about the project also. So without any further ado, Ottilie, if you could put on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So today I'll spend about 20 minutes now running through the agenda as shown. So we'll cover introduction, aims and objectives, project background, the project team, what we'll be doing, pilot projects and case studies, the outputs from the project, the opportunity to get involved, the timescales and key milestones. And then we'll have about hopefully 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So as said previously, please submit the questions by writing them in the Q&A box and be careful not to confuse that with the conversation, the chat box as well. Should we not have time to answer all of the questions, we'll put together a Q&A document and circulate that after. So we also want to learn from you as well. So we'll be inviting you to take part in a couple of interactive exercises that we have planned. One is a word cloud and the other one is a question poll, and all will become clearer in due course. And we'll also be asking you to nominate some best practice biodiversity case studies as well, which you feel have done a great job at connecting people with nature. And again, I'll come back to that later on. So all in all, we aim to wrap up by 10 AM today. Next slide, Ottilie, please. So let's start by asking you to take part in producing a word cloud together. So please connect as shown on the screen. You can either go to slido.com in a separate browser and enter that code, or you can use your phone to scan a QR code, which again will take you straight to slido.com. So whenever you are ready, please enter a word which in your mind sums up what the Wales Coast Path means to you. And they should instantly start to appear on the screen as you press submit. And please add as many words as you wish as well, but please keep to single words if possible. I'd kindly ask that you complete this in English, and then afterwards we will translate it into Welsh for the project report. Please join in the exercise if you can, however it's not compulsory. And please remember to keep the Slido browser open afterwards as well. Please don't close it down because we'll be using it again later on towards the end of the presentation for a poll. If anyone's having any difficulty, I'll just read the code out for you to enter into slido.com. It's hashtag 944725. That's 944725. And you may be familiar with word clouds, but basically it works that the more frequently a word is nominated, the larger the word appears in the cloud. So let's have a look and see what we're starting to see. We've had 9 people take part so far, and it's going up, and very clearly we have the word freedom, which is wonderful. And some interesting words in there with butterflies, adders, fun, surprising, I like that one, wild. And we have lots of words which are the same, but sometimes they're plural. So adventure and views, rocks. So this is great, but freedom clearly is coming out very strongly, which is a very pertinent word in the present situation we find ourselves in, I expect. But lots and lots of words in there. Cliffs coming through strongly. We've got 23 people who've taken part so far, 24. I'm really pleased this is working, and it's working really well. And then it's still going strong, 28 people. Horizons, that's great. So other words coming through now are walking, other popular words I should say coming through are walking, space, relaxing, exercise, views, wild, fun, seals. And someone's even put in a purple heart, which I didn't even know was possible. So that's great. There, I think you can still continue to add words in there. We've got 36 people who've entered now, so please continue to do that if you wish. Before we crack on, did any of the panel want to comment on some of the words coming through? Got rugged in there, windswept. Really great. Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll crack on now. So all of that will be saved, and again, we'll be doing analytics on the exercises afterwards and sharing those in the report. Ottilie, if you're able to move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so great. Well, I hope that's all warmed you up a bit. So what's the project about? I think if you take anything away from today, please remember the words biodiversity, connecting people with nature, and best practice. So in the long run, the project is about learning how we best safeguard nature's resources for our own well-being and that of the environment we are part of. It's about promoting the resilience of the systems we are part of, ecosystems, social systems, etc. So how is this project aiming to do that? Well, it wants to learn how best we can improve biodiversity along the Wales Coast Path, how we best improve the connection between users of and people living along the Wales Coast Path with nature. But we want to do this in a way which optimises as many other broader multiple benefits as we can, including, for example, water quality, flood risk management, carbon sequestration, health, etc. So to do this, the emphasis of this project is upon learning from best practice. Biodiversity projects and connecting people to nature isn't new, so we want to learn what has worked the best in the past. We're also learning from evidence. Again, there's plenty of research and knowledge out there already to learn from. And this will inform the best way we can reasonably scale up biodiversity projects along the 870 miles of the Wales Coast Path to deliver the long-term goals, as you see there, of ecosystem resilience and safeguarding nature's resources. So the focus of the project is on the process of scaling up, learning how we do this best. And this project is not about delivering biodiversity outcomes now, but learning how best we go about this in the future. So whilst the focus of the work is the Wales Coast Path, the findings will also relate to achieving similar goals along the national trails and other rights of way. So how did the project come about? Next slide, please, Ottilie. So the project is a collaboration between Gwyneth County Council, Natural Resources Wales and Welsh Government. It's been developed following outline ideas developed by Gwyneth Council. As such, the testbed for the project is based in Gwyneth, but with learning outcomes for across Wales. It is very well aligned with the overarching policy context of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Environment Act, underpinned by the sustainable management of natural resources and supported by various reports and strategies, including Natural Resources Wales, Vital Nature, Making the Connections Between Biodiversity and the People and Places of Wales report. So in essence, it is seeking to help address the chronic challenges we face of biodiversity decline, coastal squeeze, and our challenge to adapt to these, all of which is evidenced in the State of Natural Resources Report 2020 for coastal margins. So the project will also align with the other related coastal policies and objectives, including flood risk management, for example. But there are also opportunities to align with, including community-driven initiatives and the growing green investment market linked to carbon and biodiversity offsetting, which again will be explored through this project. So who is leading this project? Next slide, please. So the project team, there we are, is comprised of 11 members from across Welsh Government, Natural Resources Wales and Gwyneth County Council. Their expertise represents a range of interests spanning landscape, marine, coastal, recreation, biodiversity, geodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Throughout the course of the study, we will ensure we try to cover as many other perspectives and interests as possible. And that's through the various consultation activities we have planned, which I'll come on to in just a moment. So what will we be doing? Next slide, please. The project tasks can be split into 3 main work streams primarily, and these are pilot projects and case studies, talking to others and learning from them, as well as best practice research. And I'll just go through each of these now in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So the first work stream is pilot projects and case studies. So we have 2 of each. So we're currently planning 2 pilot projects centred on biodiversity restoration with a budget of £10,000 each, and they will start this summer. So we're currently in the process of selecting the pilot projects now. We have set up a task and finish group, which is a subset of the project team, and they have been tasked to choose 2 pilot biodiversity restoration projects along the Wales Coast Path in Gwyneth. And these are projects which they feel will best inform our learning outcomes. And I'll come on to these again in a minute. And we'll also be selecting 2 case studies, and this is where you come in. We'd really like your input in selecting these. And again, I'll come back to these again shortly. Next slide, please, Ottilie. So the second work stream is in terms of talking to others and learning from others. So with various consultation exercises planned, we have today's introductory webinar. We'll be talking to landowners in and around the pilot project areas to glean their experience and learn from them. We'll be, as you'll be familiar, there's been many policy consultation exercises in recent years, and many of the people whose views we want will have already submitted very detailed responses in those. So we'll be spending some time reviewing those and collecting a clear understanding of people's perspectives from that. We'll also be talking to key representative organisations of landowner networks, so for example the NFU, the National Trust, and we'll also be holding a stakeholder workshop in September. We'll be issuing and preparing some newsletters, and then we also have a final webinar to share the findings of the project early next year. And the latter 3 points there I'll come back to on another slide in terms of how you can get involved. Next slide, please, Natalie. And then finally, the third work stream is orientated around learning from best practice and evidence and existing research. This is predominantly desk-based exercise, and we'll be drawing on various guidance, reports and papers. And this will essentially inform our recommendations in terms of what to do and where, how to go about it in the best way to deliver the end goals of the project. And this will include best practice about how to connect people with nature, funding and investment, monitoring the impact of the projects as they go forward. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk about the pilot projects in a bit more detail. The pilot projects have been selected on the basis of 5 categories of considerations, which I'll touch on now. We've had to think about practical considerations, so such as, is it something we can do within budget? Is it something we can start this summer? Are there landowners willing to get involved now? We've also selected projects on the basis of expected learning outcomes. So ideally, we want to be working with private landowners, different types of landowners, and we want to be doing something fairly innovative and new. We've also considered biodiversity outcomes. So, for example, will the project address deteriorating habitats or at-risk species? Can we locate it next to existing designations, and how ecologically connected will it be? We've also thought about multiple benefits and whether the project can address broader issues such as water quality, flood risk, health, etc. And lastly, we've thought about scaling up considerations as well. So thinking perhaps about how well the project could align with future funding and investment opportunities such as carbon offsetting and biodiversity offsetting, for example. But as the aim of the pilot projects is to principally generate learning outcomes for this project, and it's less so about biodiversity and multiple benefit outcomes at this stage, the focus has been on selecting pilot projects based on practical considerations and also on those which will maximise learning outcomes for the project overall. Next slide, please. So hot off the press, we're currently progressing with 2 projects in Gwyneth. One is working with a farm to restore hedgerows, clothiae habitats, which I understand is the raised soil bank field boundaries that we have in this part of the world. It's also likely to include some grazing management and some coastal habitat management as well. The second project is similar to above. We'll be working with a farm, but taking more of a whole farm approach to restore coastal habitats and to help manage development pressures nearby. I should also add that these are very outline ideas at present, and we are starting work now with relevant advisors to work these up in more detail, ready to deliver. So as well as habitat restoration, they will also include elements of access management, landowner and community engagement, and education and interpretation. The locations will be announced as soon as discussions with landowners are completed and that they have confirmed that they are happy to share this information. Next slide, please. I'll just talk a bit about the case studies. So, as stated earlier, we really want to learn from existing good practice rather than seek to duplicate the good work of existing, ongoing or recently completed projects. So as such, it would help us a great deal if you could nominate biodiversity projects which you feel have done a great job in improving in biodiversity and connecting people to nature. So ideally projects which align with the goals of this project, which we can learn from. These could be anywhere, not just in Wales, and needn't be just coastal. So even if it's just something you've heard about, you don't need to know about it in great deal. Please feel free to nominate it in the question and answer box or email Quentin at NRW on the email address shown. So we're looking for case studies which we can learn from, perhaps in how they've engaged with landowners, or how they've attracted funding, or how they've connected with communities. So please don't hold back. Please help us select the best case studies for this project. Okay, so just a few more slides to go now. And these are about the project outputs and how you can get involved. So we will be producing a report early next year, recommending a best practice approach to scaling up biodiversity improvement projects along the Wales Coast Path. Projects which deliver multiple benefits and really aim to connect people with nature. Our recommendations will be based on best practice and best evidence, and it will evidence the need for scaling up and how best we go about it. Next slide, please. And the outputs of the project will also cover aspects such as landowner engagement, investment and funding, biodiversity data needs, the type of measures that we could be looking at, and future monitoring as well, so that we can demonstrate impact of the projects. It will include also recommendations for defining a benefit area or a Wales Coast Path biodiversity corridor, if you will, within which projects could take place or be targeted. So lastly now, I think, how can you get involved? Next slide, please. So there are 4 main ways to get involved as shown, and I'll just run through them. We'll be producing a newsletter 4 times over the course of the project, and if you'd like to be on the mailing list and find out more, please sign up by emailing Quentin on the address given. We'll also be doing various consultations, as I ran through previously, but these will primarily be targeted at landowners in and around the pilot projects, with key representative organisations as well as the case studies as well. And we'll also be holding a stakeholder workshop in September. This will be very different to today's webinar. It'll be much more interactive. It'll be online. It'll be based on small group participation and plenary sessions. And we need to ensure that the people who are invited to that are representative of the main views and interests out there which are relevant to the project. So we'll be conducting some stakeholder mapping exercises. But if you're interested in any of those, then please do get in touch with Quentin or myself. And then finally, in March next year, we'll be holding another webinar similar to this one, where we'll be sharing the results of our findings as well. And I think, yeah, next slide, please. Last slide is around timescales. So as you know, the project is just starting and we have an ambitious programme covering 10 months. So for the rest of this year, we'll be starting the pilot projects as soon as is reasonably possible. We will be focused on the consultation exercises and collecting the evidence and best practice. And the findings will be reported in early next year. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. But before we start the Q&A session, please can I invite you to take part in a question poll. So this is a ranking exercise, this one. Hopefully you still have the word cloud browser open, or the Slido browser, the one that you use to do the word cloud. And if you can go back to this, it should now have changed to the question, as you can see on the screen, as follows. So basically, what should we focus on learning about the most in order to improve biodiversity along the Wales Coast Path? So we've put some ideas in there. I'll just run through them. What you need to do is click on them in order of importance. So it may be worth just reading through them first. So the first one is understanding the best places to improve biodiversity whilst also delivering multiple benefits. Secondly, we have, oh, they've all changed order now, but I'll just run through them. We also have the types of measures that will be best at improving biodiversity. We have how best to align with funding and investment opportunities. We have how best to monitor biodiversity outcomes. And then we also have how best to work with private landowners, and also how to include public engagement to connect people with nature. So how best to connect people with nature through various activities and interpretation. So I guess if you could just have a think through those and think which one, if you were looking at how to increase biodiversity along the Wales Coast Path, which one would you focus on as the most important and rank those in order? I'll just give you a few moments to do that. And again, this will be translated into Welsh for the report outputs. So we have 9 people who have taken part so far and 61 on the call. So hopefully you're all just still thinking about it. So the one that's coming out at number 1 so far is understanding the best places to improve biodiversity whilst also delivering multiple benefits. And then followed by the types of measures that will be best at improving biodiversity. Then working with landowners. And how to connect people with nature. And near the bottom at the moment in the ranking, we have how best to align with funding and investment and how best to monitor biodiversity outcomes. So I'll just leave it a few more minutes. Got 29 people have taken part so far, so that's great. It's about 50% of people on the call. So I'll shortly be handing over to my colleagues Donna and Callan just to run through some of the questions that we've received and to direct them to the panel. But I'll just give it a few more, another 30 seconds or so, just to allow a few more people to take part and see where that takes us. Okay, so I think I'll wrap up the poll there. So we have 38 people who've taken part, and number 1 is understanding the best places to improve biodiversity whilst also delivering multiple benefits, followed by the types of measures. So there's a real strong focus on the actual practical measures and where to do them in terms of increasing biodiversity. And then we also have 3rd place, how best to work with private landowners. 4th, how to connect people with nature. And 5th is the funding and investment. And lastly is how best to monitor the biodiversity outcomes, which is interesting. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And we can see there's some questions and answers starting to come in now. So we have about 20 minutes to answer any questions that you may have. Diolch am eich amser. I'll just hand over to my colleagues. Okay, thank you very much. Donna?
Thanks, Fran. At the moment, what we've had through are some great project examples, which I have published, so hopefully people can see what they are. So thanks very much for everyone who's inputted to them so far. They include things like the ARC's Adders Are Amazing project. A few others, case studies include Little Terns at Gronant, Natterjack Toads at Tilapcra, and other ones for improving and creating wildflower meadows. So there's plenty there for us to be going on so far, so that's great, thank you. There's also a question here, not sure who it's come through from, but it says, will there be consideration of the urban parts of the Wales Coast Path later on in the project? There's plenty of interest in geodiversity in urban areas.
Yeah, well, my response to that would be, yeah, of course, you know, biodiversity in urban areas is equally as important, and in some ways more important, because people have more direct links and connection with it, is more readily accessible to more people. So yeah, that's certainly something we can cover, and because certainly urban areas do overlap with the Wales Coast Path area, Don't know if any of the panels wanted to come in on that.
Well, it's hi, Quentin here, Natural Resources Wales project manager from our side. Yes, I mean it's not really out now. It's not a case of doing it later. The whole of the Wales coast path is being considered. I mean, clearly the pilots are in certain areas, but we are looking at this applying to the whole of the coast path, and as Fran said, at future time, other trails as well. So no, don't think we're missing out urban bits. It's all part of it.
Yeah. Are there any other
Great.
questions?
There actually aren't any other questions come through yet, so perhaps if we just give people a few minutes, otherwise potentially close.
Well, I've got a question I'd like to ask people. Let's change it around, and then maybe that may prompt people to write some things. But I guess I'd be interested in knowing from this initial presentation and introduction, are there any concerns that people have out there that they would be keen to see us manage or take account of?
We'll just wait to see if anyone.
That's good news.
Responds.
Yeah. So just I guess for the panel, projects we have nominated so far are Geomon, Geopark, interpretation boards around Anglesey, which I know well. Pembrokeshire Coast NPS People Paths and Pollinators projects. Yeah. Living Levels, including the seawall management changes, the work of local nature partnerships across Wales. Nature Isn't Neat at Monmouthshire County Council, and just starting in the Gwent region, particularly the public perception survey undertaken in 2021. Yeah, this is all really useful stuff. Thank you.
Perhaps just come in and just say that you know, as this pilot runs this year, we would be really interested to hear either through the Q&A this morning or through emails. Those of you out there who are either managing access or are managing land around access, is there any particular angles, information learning that you would really like to see come out of this pilot? Because it's not just us in NRW who are responsible for the Wales Coast Path and National Trails. It's not just us who we hope will benefit from what we learn from this and the scaling up. It's learning we want to share with all of you across the local authorities and landowners. So, you know, is there anything that any of you feel would be really useful to contribute to your work areas? As I say, either perhaps throw out questions now or email Quentin when thoughts come to you.
Yeah, my contacts are on the screen at the moment, as you can see, and if you've got any suggestions for possible case studies like we've been having coming in here, or any questions or anything else, just send them to me. And if I can't answer myself, I've got a whole team of people here, of course, who can answer.
There's a question about sustainable transport. I don't know if we want to try and tackle that one.
Yep, so the question that's come through is, what are you doing to look at how people access the Wales Coast Path in terms of sustainable transport?
Well, I mean, for me, that would come under some of the wider multiple benefits of projects and connecting people to nature. So so we're just starting the project, so we're not doing anything on that now, but it's certainly something we can consider and look at going forward. Don't know if any of the panel want to add to that.
I'd say it's probably not directly part of the scope of this project, because it's, you know, we are purely focused about biodiversity and what's along the path. That's not to say it's not a consideration in the management of the coast path overall, though, because there's obviously other pieces of work going on there, which Quentin, you might be able to share.
Well, obviously, I mean, you're right. The project team considered long and hard what we had within the scope, and we decided we'd be more productive. We were quite focused. So we aren't specifically looking at transport, although it's clearly incidental and important. To be honest, I'm not aware of any current work going on looking at this in detail, although it's something we're certainly aware of.
And I know in Snowdonia National Park, for instance, they're looking at the kind of various sustainable transport options, particularly the kind of recreation activity in the last year has really highlighted some of the issues, and so there's certainly learning going forward, and it's an area we hope this is a pilot project that kind of opens the door to multiple benefits from access corridors. And of course sustainable transport is a part of that picture. It's not part of this pilot, but it's part of the bigger picture, so it's an important one to raise and one that we need to kind of build into our thinking as we go forward. So thank you for that.
Just to add to that, sorry, Molly has just responded as well, saying that there's a transport project looking into sustainable access on the Clyn already as a pilot. Great stuff. Thank you, Molly. If we move on to a few other questions that are coming in now, thick and fast. This one's a comment. Someone's just said concerns, not really. It would be good to use this work to inform the sustainable farming scheme in terms of what could be included at the coast, such as buffer zones.
Yeah.
We've got another example here of work at Llwybrau on Anglesey. Could be a good example. Thank you very much. Question from Tim Stratton. As Wrexham is landlocked, when is the future, including us?
Well, as we've said, the learning from this project is intended to be used far and wide. So although we're focusing on the coast path, the report will be, hopefully large parts of it will be applicable elsewhere. And we specified national trails, and of course part of Offa's Dyke goes through Wrexham, so you've got a little bit of that there. But as I say, we're hoping it can be applied to all sorts of rights of way and other public access paths.
Thank you, Quentin. Phil Stone has said Pembrokeshire National Trail and biodiversity teams were working on projects with this aim more than a decade ago. Are you drawing on their experience?
Yes, very important to do that.
Yep, thank you very much for noting that. We've got another example here from the dynamic dunescapes. A question here is, are CADU involved? There's loads of industrial heritage castles, etc. along the coast.
I'm happy to come in there. Again, I think it's not within the scope of this project, although if the pilot areas happen to have particular features around them, we're not going to ignore them or trample over them, if you know what I mean. But I think what it's doing is it's throwing up the massive diversity of interest and importance around our access corridors. And so this is a one-year pilot which we're hoping will grow and build, and so it's really important to have those other angles is flagged so that we can kind of think of them as we move forward. So I'm hoping we'll sort of see them coming out in the reports towards the end of this pilot. So thank you for raising that diversity of interest and importance. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliet. Somebody has commented they have a slight concern around the increased recreation due to COVID, etc. There's a need for prompting responsible recreation and decreased disturbance to wildlife, linking to following marine countryside codes. Is this part of the project too?
Happy to come in, and then I'm sure others will as well. Yeah, this is the impact of COVID particularly on particular sites, but it's had a big impact, as we know. And what we feel is by looking at the habitats and the species around access corridors in conjunction with access management, we hope to understand better how to manage access pressures, recreation pressures, and their impact on adjacent habitats. So I think in a way we're bringing all of this thinking together, so we hopefully will be able to learn how to encourage more people to visit the countryside and our paths more often, but in a way that will minimise impact, but also by connecting them to the habitats around them and the species that they can see, people can start to understand how to behave in ways that respect the environment in which they're walking through. It's a really important point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a very good point here raised, noting that we need to make sure any investments in improving biodiversity are also informed by shoreline management plans. We need to make sure the measures are future-proof in terms of management policy and climate change, which is a great flag. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very important point.
Another one coming through from Sophie. Countryside code / education, managing the balance between the public and access / nature needs consideration and is a tricky one. I think that touches on what you were just saying, Juliet. So thanks very much, Sophie. A question from Peter Rutherford. Would any coastal corridor projects be advantageous to landowner agri schemes, but in the long term?
Shall I come in on that? Yeah, I think it's one of the things we're keen to see as are options for sustainable funding, and someone else has mentioned kind of revenue funding going forward. So we'd be very interested in seeing where, you know, the learning from this pilot can be integrated into other programs, as much as creating our own program with revenue funding. I think, you know, that there's a lot of interest in seeing how this can be embedded in other schemes, and the SFS going forward is one of the obvious ones.
Yeah, thank you. There's an anonymous question here asking, will the access / biodiversity corridor include a marine bit?
Well, I think we shouldn't rule anything out. I think it's just we need to go through that process first of defining selecting the criteria by which that corridor should be defined. So yeah, I think let's just say watch this space, how we define that. I wouldn't want to commit to anything yet, but it's obviously an incredibly important part of the Wales Coast Path.
I think talking with, oh sorry. Well, I mean, we've discussed this within the project team, and we're pretty much minded that we don't want to just stop at the edge of the land, and the sea will be part of the project, because obviously there's all sorts of, from a public point of view, and then biodiversity point of view, there's all sorts of interesting things going in the sea which people might like to be aware of. So, as Fran says, we will consider further, but I think by default we will be including parts of the marine in it. Sorry, Juliet.
Yeah, no, just sort of following that. I mean, we're aware of some really exciting opportunities to help people actually understand what is beneath the water, not just in terms of the marine wildlife that's there, but also the pressures and the habitats that are out of sight, and connecting people through interpretation and all sorts of other means, so that we are looking at a coastal corridor that's about habitat improvement, but also perhaps a broader corridor that's about actually connecting people with that marine landscape, but also looking inland and looking at the landscape inland as well. So, but yeah, these are the important questions we're asking ourselves, and we'll continue to be working on, and welcome all of your input over this coming year.
Thank you. I think we've got about 5 more minutes, so we should be able to get through the last comments and questions here. Sophie has commented again. She said that we have literally just launched a new Countryside Code resource pack, which is free to download. Perhaps there's scope to weave this into the pilot. It should help learning and enjoyment of access to the countryside and coastal areas. So that's fantastic to hear. Thank you very much, Sophie. We'll certainly look into that. Another comment here, the dynamic nature of the coast is important to highlight. Erosion, deposition, landslips, etc.
Yeah.
I think on that, sorry, just on that point, there's the whole relationship between climate change and what's going on along our coastline now. And I think part of our connecting people with nature strand of this is about helping people understand the impact of climate change on what they're looking at and walking past, making those connections and understanding those. So I think, it is really important, as well as in the habitat management of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. Libby Taylor has said, focus on sustainable funding for this work would be good. Revenue funding as well as capital is needed. Will you be looking at funding models as part of your research?
So yes, that's an incredibly good point, and something we're definitely on our radar, and we've discussed with the project team. So yeah, we're definitely looking at aligning with existing and obviously new and emerging funding streams as well.
Thank you, Fran. There's a really good point raised here from Kate Surrey, who says that disturbance of ground nesting birds by dogs on the shoreline is a real issue, and she feels a need for a coordinated approach to behavioural conduct tied to interpretation on use of beaches for wildlife. It's definitely an issue that, like you say, will tie into the public interpretation side of things.
Absolutely. The more connected people feel to the nature around them, the more they understand the impacts of their own behaviours, the better able people are to make informed decisions about the behaviours that they undertake. A lot of that disturbance is people who simply don't even understand. So that's, is a really, really important part of this project, is that connecting and informing and helping people make the best choices about the habitats that they're passing through.
Absolutely. Question here, are you looking at the impact of different users, particularly important if the learning could be used where there is more access for bikes and horses, for example?
Did someone from the panel wanted to cover that?
Well, we're looking at impacts from all sources. So yes is the answer to that realistically. If whatever users are actually causing an impact on the biodiversity of the area, then we're interested in it. So yes, obviously the vast majority of the Wales coast path is actually only legally available to walkers, but that doesn't mean there aren't bikes and horses in some places.
And I think probably an important strand, either through this pilot or going forward, is understanding the different types of impacts different type of users have. I think that's important, to not just be focusing on walkers, which I think is the point you're making there. So yes, as we sort of share this learning broader and wider, is it's learning that we hope maybe sustrand cycle paths can take on, as well as bridleway long distance paths and others. So yeah, it is really important that we keep that broad base and the number of the different diversity of recreation activities going on, even sort of skateboarding down surface paths. I mean, there's endless amount of stuff going on, so we need to be really mindful of the trends in recreation and the impacts that those different activities have on habitats. So, it's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a comment here just saying that this person really welcomes the emphasis on climate change links, Juliet. So thank you for that. A question, is the logical follow-on from this project a designated coastal protected area? Does anyone want to comment on that?
I'd say we wouldn't want to prejudge the outcome of the project. That'll be my diplomatic answer.
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it?
But I think it's, sorry, I was going to say, I think the strength of this project, that it's Welsh Government, it's teams across NRW, Gwynedd County Council, we're drawing in more partners as we go, enables us to focus in on pilots on a particular access corridor. But at the same time, the strength of the partnership will mean that we will be looking broader and wider at things like sustainable farming scheme, at other designations and so on, so that we hopefully the learning can not only help those land and access managers, but actually feed into policy and strategy going forward. So, you know, we're not preempting anything, as Tom says, but I think that's the strength of this partnership, is that we can feed broad and wide the learning from this. So that's a good point.
Just looking, we've got a couple more minutes left, so just wondering if we should wrap up there and hand over to Juliet and Tom just for some final words. I think just say there are some other comments there which are really fascinating and interesting, especially one around use of apps and potentially looking at hotspots along the coast, access hotspots to focus efforts perhaps. So lots and lots still there coming in. So thank you very much to everyone for your time. Diolch am eich amser. And I think, yeah, and we'll just hand over to Juliet now to say a few words. And thank you to my colleagues, Callan and Donna, for the time today in Otterley. So Juliet, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to Binnies for hosting and running this 1 hour webinar, and up to all of you who've joined it for this hour and have contributed, and I hope will continue to contribute and work with us as we go forward. It's a really exciting project, and I feel that it's really going to make a difference as we move forward, but it'll only make the difference if we collectively share the wealth of skills, knowledge and experience that we have through all of you on the calls and through our partners. So, you know, just look forward to working with you all into the future. Diolch yn fawr. Over to Tom.
Yeah, diolch Juliet. Yes, dim lot I ychwanegu. Just diolch I bawb am ymuno. Diolch I Juliet a Fran, a host staff o Binnies, a hefyd I Rhys Roberts o Gwynedd. Edrych ymlaen rannu mwy am y project. Just to thank the speakers, Juliet, Fran and the staff at Binnies and Rhys and Quentin. Thanks to you all for joining us and your questions, and we look forward to sharing more about the project soon. Diolch.
Diolch.
Perhaps a final apology for the audio problems right at the beginning. There was a bit of a technical thing going on there, so sorry about that, everyone.